The United States of America's infrastructure is rated a C- by the American Society for Engineers. Congress is finally seeking to address the issue in 2021. Will their legislation properly address the problem? Let's find out. Welcome to the People's Basics Network, home of the Universal Basics. In this new series, I do the legwork of reading through the important legislation to provide a summary and grade for you all. Make sure that you're subscribed, and if you like today's video, please give us a like and consider becoming a member of the People's Basics. So with that being said, infrastructure, it's what makes our roads and transit systems, our water pipes and water treatment, as well as our parks and waste facilities, to name just a few things. But when most people don't typically think about infrastructure, we've been seeing it crumble all around us to the point where we finally had to start taking notice and actually have to do something about it. So in today's episode, we're going to be covering the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that is passed in the Senate and is awaiting now a vote in the House of Representatives. Our needs for infrastructure are going to exceed what's covered in the bill that we're covering today, but the contents of that bill that do remain are mostly positive and do help us achieve something rather than nothing. And that, in my opinion, is somewhat of a win for America, even if it's not everything we want. So with that being said, let's cover what made it into this bill and, what didn't. As well, we're going to talk about the budget resolution that has been attached to this politically. Currently, the Democrats have passed a budget resolution, and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has said this infrastructure bill is not going to receive a vote unless this reconciliation bill does as well, and so we're going to need to look at both pieces of legislation in our total grade. So before we give you all that grade, let's talk about what is in it. And well, there's a lot. There are a total of 117 bills contained within this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act bill. And this bill is being sponsored by Peter DeFazio of Oregon's 4th District. First of all, it extends and reauthorizes a variety of existing federal programs through 2026 and does degrees of funding appropriations within those programs through 2022. Furthermore, it does a new investment of $550 billion in spending. Now, this was compared to the previous initial proposal done by purely Democrats of $2.6 trillion. This bill that was being negotiated between Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats, those that tend to be quote-unquote more centrist, but tend to just be conservative and maybe not nationally on the right, came to this $550 billion figure. And what is that $550 billion going for? Well, it goes for highway transportation, rail, freight, safety, public transportation, airports, electric vehicles, water infrastructure, energy infrastructure, building infrastructure's efficiency, to make sure, buildings aren't emitting off too much heat, making sure that they're, being maintained in energy efficient manners as well. It goes into broadband infrastructure. It goes into resiliency from climate change. There's a lot that is contained within this bill, and a lot of that is good things that we did need to fix, but there was a lot that's been left out. So when it comes to some of the things that weren't covered, as you might ask, before we get into the length of what is in this bill, some of the issues that they did not address were things like the national park system. They did not address much in the way of levees. They did not address much in the way of inland waterways. They did not do much on addressing the need to rebuild our public schools. A quote by the U.S. Committee on Education and Labor, Robert Cortez, who is of Virginia's 3rd District, is quoted as saying, in 2014, a Department of Education study estimated that it would cost $197 billion to bring all public schools into good condition. They also said the 2016 State of Our Schools report determined that there is an annual state and local spending gap of around $46 billion on school facilities. A 2006 Building Education Success Together report found that high poverty and minority serving schools were those most often unable to adequately invest into their school facilities. And that furthermore, schools predominantly serving white students spent nearly 50% more on capital construction than those serving minority students, and wealthy districts spending nearly triple the high poverty counterpoints. So that is one area. They didn't also include rebuilding of our public housing system. According to a publication by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and Policy Map, written by Eileen DeVringy, Eliza Wallace, Keith Wardrop, and Elizabeth Nash, the national repair costs in the U.S. for our public housing is around $126.9 billion to repair all housing deficiencies nationwide, with an average cost of roughly $2,920 per household with repair needs. Of that, it would cost roughly $25.3 billion to repair the homes of low-income homeowners and $25.5 billion to repair the homes of low-income renters. And then the final thing that this bill didn't really do much in how we need to transition our infrastructure system is handle how we get off of the fossil fuel energy as our main primary energy source. It does not do much to take our energy grid from fossil fuel driven to renewables and nuclear driven. So those are some of the things that we're going to ding this bill on. But let's get to some of the contents that make this good. So first, highway transportation. So some of the things that are contained in this is that they add new eligibilities to the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program for things like electric charging infrastructure, resiliency, cybersecurity, and more. They increase funding of Transportation Alternatives Program, which are meant to improve the quality of life of communities as a whole, as well as providing some, economic and social benefits, like including pedestrian and biking facilities. They do extra funding for vehicle sharing programs. They do an increased share of funds for railway high crossing. So making sure that people aren't getting run over by trains while they're driving. They increase the maximum number of highway miles a state may designate as critical rural freight corridors from 150 miles to 300 miles, and critical urban freight corridors from 75 miles to 150 miles. They implemented a carbon reduction program. They introduced more funds for highway weatherization. They tried to streamline the application for federal funds from the DOT, the Department of Transportation. They did congestion relief funds for urban areas. They established a program to help reduce idling and emissions at port facilities. They tried to establish new healthy street programs to provide grants to eligible entities to deploy kind of cool pavements and porous pavements to expand tree cover. They also did an establishment of a community connectivity pilot to basically help more communities who have been divided by highways to be reconnected. They did a new allowance of flexibility for the Highway Safety Improvement Program funds. They did an establishment of Transportation Access Pilot Program to develop and procure, accessibility data and make it available to each eligible entity selected in the pilot program, so that we can make sure that the disability community is being properly helped out by our roadways. It also establishes a grant program to provide assistance to state departments of transportation and local government entities for bollard installation projects, which are designed to prevent pedestrian injuries and acts of terrorism in areas used by large numbers of pedestrians. It directs the Department of Transportation to update the manual on uniform traffic control devices on a periodic basis of no less than 4 years. And as well, it establishes a new competitive grant program to assist state, local, federal, and even tribal entities in rehabilitating and replacing bridges and culverts. So this is what it did on highway transportation. The next area it impacted was rail, safety, and transportation. So what it did here was it made sure to do new investment into some emerging technologies research. So things like AI driving, 3D printing, per mile driving fee taxes that they want to consider, as well as just new forms of infrastructure and the technology that surrounds that. They also want to do more regional project assistance. They also want to help in the process of doing culvert removal, which is the process of helping freshwater fish be able to get passage across certain infrastructure. They also are doing an Amtrak national network and Northeast corridor repairs. They're doing intercity passenger rail expansions. They want to do an improvement on railroad safety technology that they currently have in place. They want to try and do an analysis to try and find more unnecessary railroad crossings and eliminate them. They want to do more repairs on railroad track infrastructure. They also want to have continued funding of initiatives to help the Vision Zero program to reduce traffic incidents that occur. Then the next category that they did funding for was just general public transportation. So again, this is going to involve more project assistance on various levels, more mobility assistance that they're going to provide, continuing to fund Vision Zero programs, repairing culverts. You're going to see some replication in some of the subjects because various infrastructure things need various similar needs of repair and design so it's efficiently helping those in that community. So furthermore, it has things like repairing bridges still. It has helping reconnect areas, as we were talking about. One new thing, they want to do more construction of ferry boats and ferry terminal facilities. They want to continue to improve railway safety. They want to provide more grants through the Federal Transportation Administration. They want more intercity rails in place. They want to fund more grants for bridges. They want to eliminate railroad crossings. A lot of the stuff you saw in that rail section are basically the same things that they're looking to do in public transportation overall. So the next area they try to do is airports. We need to be repairing our airports, and so what do? They want to provide more grants for just general facility maintenance, and as well to expand certain areas, accessibility of having airports. As well, they want to do repairs on the actual facilities, maintenance of certain handling of hazardous materials, and replace certain equipment. So that's what they are looking to do for airports. For electric vehicles, they are currently looking to expand the electric charging facilities that we have around the country. They want to do more funding for electric school buses, and they want to help provide more funds for having electric or at least low emission ferries. So that's all that they're doing on electric vehicles. The next area is water infrastructure. On water infrastructure, they are currently trying to expand the drinking water state revolving funds, as well as the clean water state revolving funds, so that they have more funds for each state to be able to administer programs to be able to ensure that their water supply is clean. They want to do more funding, especially to prevent lead as well as PFAS chemicals coming into our waterway and contaminating it. They want to make sure that there's money for dam repairs. They want to make sure that there's money for groundwater storage repairs. They want to have increases in desalination plants. They want to expand rural water infrastructure so that more areas have higher accessibility to water during times of drought. They also want to make sure that there is more funding in place for innovation in the water infrastructure market so that we can prevent some of these problems from happening. I've seen certain examples like California has, where they face a lot of droughts, where they invested in a ton of black balls to actually absorb the sun so it doesn't evaporate their water supply in their reservoirs. So there's definitely need for continuing innovating and protecting our water infrastructure. They also want to do more management of cooperative watersheds, and they want to do some more help on aquatic ecosystem restoration. So that is what they cover on the water infrastructure side. The next thing is energy infrastructure. So this provides grants to weatherize our energy grid. It provides additional funds for research on improving energy system reliability and resiliency so that we don't have situations like what happened in Texas occur, where the energy grid basically gets brought down by cold weather events. They want to have a revolving loan fund to facilitate the construction of new or replacement power transmission lines. They want to have new grant programs for the deployment of technologies that would allow for increased flexibility in responding to natural disasters. They also want to enhance just general grid security so that you're not going to have, cybercrime occurring on trying to take down energy grids, and they want to do this through the establishment of public-private partnerships. They also want to have a little bit of a direction to the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to promulgate rules that incentivize investments into cybersecurity. They also want to establish new investment into clean energy supply, new funding of grant programs for carbon capture technology, new grant funding for hydrogen energy research. They want to do new grant funding for nuclear energy. As well, they want to increase funds for the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, the Office of Electricity, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, and the Office of Fossil Energy Carbon Management. So that is what they have currently covered in the energy infrastructure side of things. Then on to the next area, we got building infrastructure efficiency. So what is entailed in that? We have, first of all, Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund capitalization grants. This is just trying to help people in improving the building so that they have more funds that they can use towards that. They want to as well provide some new updates to localities so that they can start, updating their building energy codes so that they can handle potentially some of the costs of repairing it so that it becomes up to code. As well, they want to grant institutions of higher education to establish centers to train engineers and other qualified individuals in energy efficient design and operations of these types of facilities. They want to fund weatherization assistance programs, which will help reduce household energy usage through the installation of cost-effective energy saving programs. They want to establish new energy efficiency and conservation block grant programs to provide grants to state and local governments for energy efficiency and conservation projects. And they also want to provide grants to federal agencies to leverage private capital to make energy and water efficiency upgrades to federal buildings. So that's what they want to do in trying to update what we do around our buildings so that they are more efficient. The next area is broadband internet. So what do they do on broadband internet? They first of all do some updates for their formulas so that it's more accessible for who would qualify for certain funding on certain things like infrastructure, mapping, and adoption projects of new broadband systems. They also want to establish a grant program at the NTIA for the construction, improvement, and acquisition of middle mile infrastructure, basically, which is defined as any infrastructure that does not connect directly to an end user location, including an anchor institution. So basically, this means that if this is infrastructure that's simply providing it to like a public location rather than a direct individual, they want to own a little bit more of the supply chain that's kind of driving that connection point to them. Furthermore, they want to ensure that they have more digital equity, support for digital inclusion activities that are incorporated at the state level so that they are trying to get more communities that are without broadband connected. They also want to make sure that there is an emergency broadband benefit program at the FCC, which is basically a renaming of the Affordable Connectivity Program, which provides basically subsidized broadband internet connection. They also want to requires of displaying consumer broadband labels, and they want to make sure that the FCC is adopting a rule within 2 years to be able to address digital discrimination. This relates to the whole net neutrality argument. So, a lot of good things here. Doesn't go as far as I'd like in trying to establish more public broadband systems, but it is still trying to address those gaps. But the final area that we have within this bill is climate change resiliency. And so what they do on this regard is they want to expand the funds that they're providing to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They want to invest in hazardous substance super funds. And this is basically a remediation account for the remediation of properties that are contaminated with basically legacy releases of hazardous substances. So when we have a substance that we previously allowed in the past as a chemical in normal business to go by, we don't penalize the companies because they weren't technically breaking the law. So what we do as the government is try to help remediate the properties that were still impacted by these chemicals. And now going forward, if people then use those chemicals, they're supposed to be paying for the damages. Now we know that doesn't always occur, but That is at least what is ideally supposed to occur in those situations. And then finally, they want to provide new grant programs for brownfields to help this contaminated land be restored and used. So you got kind of the support on the human side for people who have been impacted by these hazardous wastes, and then you got trying to actually rebuild some of these land that is hazardous currently and clean it up. So that is the substance of the bill, of what they're looking to pay for. But we should talk about some of the measures that they look to include to assure that there is some funding in place for these measures. So they include things such as the reinstatement of the Superfund tax, which is an excise tax on the sale, use, or import of 42 listed chemicals. There is also, this is expected to generate a $14.45 billion revenue for the government. The next thing is that they want to do more information reporting for cryptocurrency. So they want to introduce new IRS reporting requirements on brokers of cryptocurrency that they define as, quote, any person who is responsible for regularly providing any service effectuating transfers of digital assets on behalf of another person. A bit broad of a definition, and we'll cover that as well when we're going through our final grading. The next use of funding they have is the early termination of the employment retention credit, which was basically a refundable tax credit for employers that were impacted by the pandemic, was set to expire at the end of 2021. This program basically eliminates the credit for all employers except those classified as startup recovery businesses early. So they just wanted to reappropriate some of the funds that they gave in the past for this new program for infrastructure, which again, not a good thing that they are not allowing more small businesses to continue to earn the support that they need. As well, they're establishing new pension interest rate stabilizations that is supposed to earn $2.87 billion from that. And then finally, it's got stimulus spending, a lot of it, $465 billion to be exact. Now, this is not to say necessarily is inflationary. A lot of the times when you're investing into this productive means like in infrastructure, you're not going to increase inflation from doing new stimulus. So I'm not too worried about that regard. I think that is a good idea. So that is what the infrastructure bill contains. A lot of that is good stuff. It's a bit technocratic and it's a bit repetitive within the areas, but we thought you deserved to know the actual details of what is in this bill. Now, I already told you what was not enough, but we now have to talk about the reconciliation bill before we can get into a final grade. Because as you know, this is being tied together by Nancy Pelosi's request that it get a vote at the same time. And the reconciliation bill was something that had $3.5 trillion initially proposed as a budget resolution. But now that it's going forward, we're getting to the point where the actual reconciliation occurs, which is saying we now have up to $3.5 trillion to spend across these causes. What are we actually going to spend now? And you may know that this is not going to be an easy process because we're going to have some Democrats, more conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who have expressed their concerns about that $3.5 trillion figure. So let's talk to you about what is initially desired within this bill before we talk to you about what are some of the changes that the conservative Democrats are trying to change within that bill before finally concluding on a grade for the infrastructure bill. So some measures included in the first draft of the reconciliation bill are measures related to climate change, whether it be things like regulations or research and incentives and measures of enforcement. And I should note to you all, these are going to be rather vague because this is a resolution bill. It's not a bill of actual legislation where you got to get real technical and have certain programs and do the proper appropriation. This is just a basic statement of goals and values of what you want the government to then accomplish. So this is the resolution that the Senate had given us. So it includes all measures of climate action that they're looking to take. It's including things like debt relief for farmers, constructing more affordable housing, investing in science and technology research, providing paid medical leave, providing paid maternity and paternity leave, ending the Medicaid coverage gap in the ACA when certain red states didn't want to actually opt into the matching funds that the federal government was providing. It wants to expand Medicare so that it provides service of vision, dental, and hearing, as well as the negotiation of pharmaceutical prices, and that it expands the coverage to be down to the age of 60 years old. They want to extend the child tax credit to be a more permanent measure. They want to have universal pre-K for all 3- and 4-year-olds. They want to have tuition-free community college. They're looking to provide long-term care options for the elderly and disabled. They're looking to provide more funding for labor law enforcement. They want to provide more funding for community violence intervention. They're looking to reform the pathway to legal residency as well as citizenship. They're looking to create a new small business credit line. They're looking to make investments into the VA. They want to do some reforms of corporate and international taxation. They also, in the same thing, say that they want to raise income taxes for those making more than $400K. And that is basically what they've said. So let me talk a little bit about some of the downsides of what's included, because there's a lot of good that I clearly just covered here that covers a lot of the universal basics of which we advocate. But there are definitely downsides, the biggest of which is that this is just a reconciliation bill and a resolution. We don't have the final specifics yet ironed out, and we have big obstructing factors like Joe Manchin, who this past week wrote up an op-ed laying out how he has serious reservations about $3.5 trillion in spending and how he wants to do closer to $1.5 trillion in spending. Some cuts he includes, going from that $2 trillion cut, is cutting home caregiver aid and funding new programs revolving caregivers. They also Joe Manchin also wants to do more means testing of the child tax credit, of community college, free community college, of universal pre-K, and of the child, those 3 things, the child tax credit, community college, and universal pre-K. He also has stated that this bill must be 100% paid for. There cannot be any stimulus spending in this bill if he is to vote for it. And he has cited his reason for this being that he is concerned about inflation and having more money on hand to be able to spend on future crises. Some other things that I also thought were not the best measures contained within this bill is that there is a lack of addressing our food infrastructure system and just incentives around what food we kind of fund. I thought there was, it was bad that it included the repeal of the SALT deduction cap, the benefits of which primarily accrue to the top 1%, and by far the top 20%. 96% of the benefit goes to the top 20%, and I think it's 85% goes to the top 1%. They also don't include any differentiation in marginal taxation rates for the corporate income tax raise, where they're kind of going 25% across the board rather than simply raising that rate for the larger companies. This is something that actually is due to Trump's tax cuts. Was he actually raised and lowered taxes for corporations depending on their size. Small businesses had to pay higher taxes and large businesses started to have to pay lower taxes so that they would pay one flat tax rate across the board. And it was a shame that the Democrats didn't try to re-implement that system back of having marginal rates so that small businesses pay less in taxation than large businesses. On top of that, I was a little bit bummed to see that they had removed in the process something they originally intended to have in this reconciliation bill, which was increased funding for the IRS to do more tax enforcement as well as processing of taxes. I'll tell you this, as someone currently recording on September 8th, I still have not received my tax returns back, as well as tens of millions of Americans haven't either. So it would have been a big deal if we could have increased the funding of the IRS, especially if we want to do the things like Joe Manchin is asking for, like increasing means testing, which increases the administration work. But then there's also some other things that are downsides. I mentioned this before, but some of the terminology in the reporting requirements for cryptocurrency were a bit too broad. It, defined brokers a bit too broadly, in my opinion. Opponents saying it's going to stifle innovation by unfairly putting new tax reporting obligations on software developers and crypto miner users who create coins by lending computing power to verify other users' transactions and receive coins in exchange. Those people don't have access to the cryptocurrency users' data that the IRS would be collecting, the opponents say. So they say that this reporting requirement is unduly cumbersome and would largely kill off the technology and innovation within the sector. So that is the bill in its totality. So what do we come to as a grade for this effort? In my opinion, if we are to get the full reconciliation bill with all the items originally intended in the $3.5 trillion and the original infrastructure bill of the $550 billion in spending, I would give this bill an A-. I've already talked to you about a lot of the things that were downsides. If it was in the bill and I didn't call it out as a downside, I think it's a positive thing that we need to be spending. It would be a great piece of legislation and a serious win for America to have this buildup of our hard and soft infrastructure to the tune of around $4 trillion. Is it enough? No. I've mentioned certain things where they didn't do sufficient funding, but it is significant progress on a lot of areas that need assistance. Next grade, because I want to give you some caveats in this grade, is what would I grade this bill if we get the watered down version that Joe Manchin is asking us to take on? There's $1.5 trillion with additional severe means testing of a lot of these programs in place. I'm going to have to give that grade personally a B-. I think that the means testing of these programs is a severe downside for what are supposed to be these really helpful universal programs. I think that a lot of the taxation methods that were getting pulled out and softened from the corporate tax rate getting lowered because of Joe Manchin again is a problem. I think that you're going to have a lot of people who are in need of care work be lacking that care that they need. You're going to have a lot of these infrastructure things that didn't do anything really serious to address the transition that we need off of fossil fuels actually occur. So I'm going to give it a B-. I'm not to say this is bad. It's a passing grade. It's higher than a C. It's a solid 80. But it's not a great bill. It's an okay bill. And then without the reconciliation, if we get the pure, just the infrastructure package, which has been a position that other conservative Democrats have been taking, a position taken by 9 members in the House of Representatives, that's going to be a serious issue where we now no longer get that $1.5 trillion in soft infrastructure of social infrastructure. We only get the hard infrastructure needs that we covered in detail. And of that, I'm going to give that bill a C. There are areas where it is currently missing the need to do a full transition off our fossil fuel system. There are things in place that somewhat preserve it in place currently. There are things where we are missing on certain parts of the infrastructure, like levees and waterways. Levees most important in my mind because we've seen the damage that not having proper protection against hurricanes can cause. And levees are a big source of protection that we have. So I'd give that bill a C if it just passed purely on its own. But we will see how it goes, and we want to know how you all felt about this bill as well. So please tell us what you think your grade for this bill would be below. And we want to give a shout out for the coverage that we did in this episode to Holland and Knight Law, who provided very helpful summaries on some of the different programs in place already that we were analyzing within this infrastructure bill. So with that being said, that's going to do it for us, folks. We hope that you will subscribe to the channel if you liked hearing today's review of a big piece of legislation. We're going to be continuing to do this series every other week. The next piece of legislation that we're going to be looking to review is the EAGLE Act, which is a piece of legislation regarding the changes of our immigration processes and helping people get a pathway to legal residence and legal citizenship here who are currently undocumented. So we hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, leave us a like, as well as giving us that comment. What is your grade on this infrastructure bill? And in the meantime, we'll hope you check out another video here on the network. As I said, it's only going to be another couple weeks until the next legislation review, but we have so much other content at the People's Basics for you to check out. from the People's Platform to the People's Podcast to so much more that we have on our website, like articles and more. So we also hope you'll join our community. Get connected with us by joining our Discord where we do our organizing, and you can find all of our links to everything at our network in the description section down below at our link tree. Finally, we want to just thank you so much for tuning in to the People's Basics and supporting the home of the Universal Basics. We love you, and we hope to see you again soon, Universal People.